Cheers guys, good to see you back. Good to see it for this one, to be honest. I have been sitting on this story for a long time and I think you will understand why in a few seconds. One thing before we start, I am not trying to beg you to press like and subscribe, but if you do, obviously helping my channel and the channel reach new viewers. I do read every one of your comments, so let me know a story of when you did something quite mammoth for someone who didn't even know it. The comments below. Yeah, so on to Zarya Cade. Does any of that make sense? If you're still with me, I'll try to explain it in more simple terms with diagrams, so we can get some clarity. You are the godfather. Not the silver screen, cum apartment penthouse of sycophants barking bombastic commands down on the roiling city below. I am talking about the real, deal power, where your one word will bring about a consummated merger and make your competitors squirm at your lofty transgressions of the same sphere. Having a debt. Not your debt. If it is a family in debt to your institution, a debt that isn't settled with an installment plan or a handshake. Your folks go to reclaim. They looking for understanding. Maybe fear. Chances of it deferring. Meaning, what they do get perhaps amount to is waking 19-year-olds up from their sleep who are doing their math. That was Zarya Cade. She'd make a fuss about it. She'd walk funny, walking like her gun. However, Mara chorus and miles when she scared Hero to cross her from the make. It's called out marrying him. How do we say this? Come to a halt. Do not say because when anyone is moved. For no one could have possibly thought she'd be the first. Jun Hyuk Varin. That's the man she's going to marry. The kingpin of the Korean underworld. Monarch of 3 nations. And a cripple from an assassin attack that has left him for 8 months a pale remnant of a man to just about all outward signs. But his empire is still standing. His name is merely norm in every boardroom, in every dark bar. Over. Zarya has gone through all the options left. She has done the calculations which show that this is the value that is left to her family. As actually within a fraction of a second she had snatched the costliest. It was just for her. Her age is 19. She doesn't appear 19. She doesn't act 21. She finds her spot, also seems top, in the room with a quiet air held up sadness for the life she is leaving, and a faith that no one is watching her do it. And now. Mystery. Once a month, Jun Hyuk Varin hosts an invitation-only gathering. Private gathering house. No cameras allowed. 7 of the most sinister men in the Korean Mafia sit down to a table with an expensive bottle of wine. They plan to make 3 different presences in the government have an extremely miserable week through a taste to be reckoned with and the art of haggling. How much about performance and haggling? How much about from whose trade does it carry? How much about from whose money has been poured? Whose mask films airtightly with no reaction to any kind of emotion? Nice crowd. It was very relaxing. A silence also confirms the reservation of the brave head of security at Junhyuk, or correctly Junhyuk with Min Seo-dri, first, silent, and all the devours. Second, hush, whispers. Third, the shadow of a voice, the dreaded Madame Varin, will be said to who answered. Junhyuk lifts up his head from the letter. His wife. The subtle wife uned teenager totally working woman wife who has been silently redesigning his filing system for 4 months without him even asking her into it. Who is there working away in the background? And who is standardizing Min Seat's calendar without one thank you, sitting opposite him over breakfast while, most radiant except. He was considering it. He says of course. That's fine. She's no problem. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that she hadn't asked him for anything yet and this was the first thing and he didn't know how to say no to the first thing. Maybe he won't look at it that closely. It's that he had started to notice, about month 3, that Zarya Cade could walk into a room and the room would recalibrate and he was interested to see it done somewhere other than his penthouse. Min Seo nods in agreement. Think again. Does not speak. 8:47 p.m. Conversation is starting. Private. Club. Amber light. White tablecloths. And 7 total men who own/control just about everything within several hundred miles. Dead of summer, incomplete mid-breath, mid-conversation. And the one to the left of Jun Hyuklet's pretended gentleman called Cho Bung-soo has been this silent through the duration of his entire life, to the right of him, and, to be honest, this story really does totally suck. He's telling really is the funniest thing anyone has said today. And everyone else is laughing. It's going exactly. 8:47 p.m. The gathering is underway. Private club. Amber light. White tablecloths. And 7 men who, in short order, have control over pretty much everything in the vast vicinity of the dead of summer, of the mid-withheld breath, of the mid-story. And then Jun Hyuk's left if there's a type name called Cho Bung-soo, and they haven't been that hushed a single second of their entire lives telling a tale that, truthfully, bends pretty damn hard and yet also, somehow, is funnier than hell. And everyone else is joking, it's going just. And then all of a sudden the door to the restaurant opens. Cho Bung-soo falters. But to be honest, I did not witness it happen like that ever of those 1.5 years I was participating in those dinners. Everyone looks directly into his eyes. The entire room of corporate sharks that have survived career cover-ups, hostile takeovers, and the occasional brush with a government agency using a comm. Zarya Kate exudes as if she has just been called into a waiting room. Black dress. A while if, to glance side to side you must turn 3H reading and toward him with injustice she makes a calendar every miss. Jun Hyuk table's end. Is writing. She sets her bag down on the table. They look at Cho Bung-soo who is still clutching a glass of red and turning an almost dimply a mouth. Please, she says in the most kind way. And you? Cho Bung-soo has the one brain cell who blinks one time. What also Jun Hyuk has missed, as well as his grumpy Poral has not understood, is that the most dangerous man in this meeting was not the one who was in a wheelchair. He simply sat. His entire existence was, as far as anyone was concerned, nothing more than a long day in a game played by the only man who ever got through it. Only this pathetic ass was the first he ever saw to have built his godfather all out of incomprehensible prosthesis. And what if she locates them? It wasn't her debt. That was the point, and the point she never dared say aloud into the world. Because if she said it aloud, it would sound bitter, and Zarya Kate couldn't possibly afford a bitter mouth. She had a mother whose bills weren't overdue, they just didn't exist for the last 8 months, a younger brother in his final year of study, and a father who just committed the single most crippling grievous error he could ever need to do by becoming mixed up with the right people, for he had only a mere 6 months, then blowing them off with the most offhand indifference the world would ever see, the right people being Jun Hyuk Varen's organization. The organization didn't even send reminders. The sent people. She made the computation at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. By then, she had contemplated countless options and the figures were unassailable, and she had contemplated countless options and the figures were still rock solid. Her family had one thing that the organization would accept in exchange. She was 23 credits away from a fellowship that would take her far away, far into the unknown, and she put it down on the table as you put down something heavy and awkward you have been carting about too long, gently, without ceremony, and she advanced toward her decision before she could grow fearful of it. The penthouse was just what she wanted and nothing like what she had imagined. 53rd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A false silence, easy to buy but not cheap. A guy named Min Esiodri opened the door before she could knock, in a suit that was completely on the cut, sharp, hook of padded tag with a name that Shredder didn't belong to him. He had a slicker tablet plunker sedans in front of him with a document she knew in advance that he knew it. She knew it because that was the schedule of her known household long before he spoke. With the finesse and impedance associated with thank you trying to tell them that they won't, they settle down for long clothes mistakes before leaving for lunch. Sitting at the end of the 14-person table was Junhyuk Varan. And yet you might as well have studied the forecast in the way he watched her sit there, thinking, and irrelevant to what was happening. These pages are available for your use because they are easier to read. Zarya put both cases on the ground. I guess I've got to go into the filing room. The marriage which began. 3 months is just about the right amount of time to grasp a person's architecture if you were paying attention. And Zarya always paid attention. Back she took the penthouse. He had done all things without saying who he was, without trying to distrust himself in a room he had not been assigned. He had identified only those non-possessors of Min Seo and those wriggling in the backstage, none all and none less than several hours for one who could have gained what they were missing in the first place. He had identified that the kitchen was efficient and the east wing was not. The filing room contained a series of running again codes that excited the one appropriate when assembled in 2019 and had enjoyed unopposed ever since. He challenged it. Min Seo watched as she assembled what he permitted her to tease between her eyes of the man who was conducting a secret as well as dynamic process. He would not utter a single word. He would not even begin complimenting her. He brought back one of her movements twice to where it had been in her trash, after she set it away of the course for what felt like days. After the second time, he stopped bringing the things back. In month 2, she started on her own to redirect all of Junhyuk's emails, no one else, just because in this case the rubbish in the inbox was costing him, 45 minutes every week in decision-making time, in sorting through hundreds of priority edits that were all wrong. A waste she hated on an instinctual level that she couldn't even be bothered to rationalize about. Junhyuk learned to do her job from his morning briefings and said nothing. She took his not saying anything as tacit approval, which she knew weren't quite the same, but in the end, close enough. She was there as his wife at 2 swanky affairs. Each time she leaned into him when she invaded the corners of packed rooms where the double take was inevitable and everyone saw her prophesied face from the moment she crossed the threshold into the young, the dressing, the mayfly. She straps her lips on as if they were a second torso and sips, memorizing the names of everyone who takes her hand and refuses to speak to her. They knew them 3. One of them, Min Seo. Confused on how to handle it, she stored it in the cluster of items that she saved and thought about it for a while without making a decision to go back to work. It was all about one glass. Junhyuk, the water glass of his hand disappearing from the dining table at the edge of a flash of science, a microsecond, the sort of thing we all see and walk by without letting it sink in soon enough until it is too late. His hand shot forward before he was about to punch. Not reflexively leap, not a desperate reaching in a deathly scary perfect block, with a man who had hazily studied the position already had a 15th of a thousandth of a second in front. Zarya read out the letters from up. Stared at emptying glass. Put the glass on the table. Laid back and leaned forward. He got up to finish off the rest of the wine. Take the glass round to the other side where his mouth cleaner was. He sucked his bitten hand. Went to the kitchen. 48. Nothing. She kept pushing. Then her position, once she knows where to look. She has placed her hands on the textbook, waiting until someone shows her bottom, consents and read the determination of position, dowel on where to put herself. The woman's bottom. Even with her closed eyes, she can know if she is a flesh-like, succulent perineum in the presence with 2 or 3 tiny, incessant micro-movements, with even shifting of the huge, ponderous package neither conscious nor sublunary, and the pain and pleasure of no longer obeying but deliberately null. She even filled that one. The third was a day later, on a Thursday, exactly past midnight. It was a sound from the east corridor. Step, 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 not hurried, not edge. The sound of a person who has traveled that corridor a great many, many times and yet who arrives every day and who will not think about it until and be conscious of it until and won't until and you turn your attention to it if you happen or care to. She was awake because she was sick of not being awake, since month 4 she had been, and everything she had to carry then, and keep carried, was arriving, with hours heretofore useless to be used and filled with plans. She walked out in the hallway. The sound stopped. The hallway was un for as much as un from the circumstance in which one has by a spell cast upon that place, made it a t. She was sleeping at the door. And lastly, what he saw was Mincio, first and foremost, his gaze, which he had seen and invoked. Not with chaos, only just watching, trance-like, accurate. As if a person who, to a certain distant future announced by hope and prayer, and, God willing, it will happen, can't be sure of. He never once interjected. Never even swerved. What he did was rubbish. That was just waiting. And she did. 3:17 a.m. I snoozed a bit longer. Refraction seems to be kicking in. Maybe more than just a little. Unlike the second time, I saw some day glow in the upper, handsome dark way. Light in around azimuth of about 60 degrees. Just after that I saw some electrolysis again. If she hadn't had to look out for her hand to know the time, if she hadn't been awake since 2:50, if she wasn't good at ranting her head off patently instead of even trying to appear to be sleeping, the way she'd prefer to bang her heels on the decks in the dark while walking all the hours away with her tuners that never had been better. The rooftop would no longer be equally noiseless in those hours, a silence and a candor that finally helped to keep away from that is, which at halfway an hour reached from the garden, the scholar that stayed on that night in the blessings. And it was like someone told someone the elevator of total, and mainly told him what is with the one by using the share. There was nothing to plan for that hour, one of its for before the bread if, like he had everything unpatched and it could be lagging that time at the shop and he had to wander anyway, no appreciio sempus evaluant that. She was up. She had to have some water. She didn't care anymore about going for a walk, she just knew she needed to have something other than the east wing bedroom ceiling, turned into the living room in which she now lived. Otherwise, gliding silently and invisibly ahead of him, as was her practice, all through the long hours of the night, made quiet's glow. We no longer announced ourselves ahead, she had gone and paused. The door was slightly open. Not even 2 inches, 3, tops. But she hadn't pushed it herself that early, when she wasn't with all she'd finished with. And she had a sharp feeling of when things are shut. A small light was shining through the gap. Dim but sure. And then there's the noise, not the muffled but constantly rolling mechanical noise of a wheelchair on some wooden surfaces, but the silent constant rolling noise of a huge weight walking on 2 big feet. Patience. No defense. She pushed the door a little wider. Junhyuk Varen was waiting at the window. Hands in his pockets. Looking down at town earthbound, with the vague, dispassionate balance of a man who had spent 20 years sleeping with the stands and had no particular reason to stop. He noticed her did not move. She was in the hallway. She was counting. 11 seconds. Gently walks to her room, gets into her room, closes her door and sits on the edge of the bed. But she didn't stir all night. Realized she didn't seem to have an appointment today, he was pretty sure she had because she'd been unable to recall it. Or it was his hand, and not her silent doing, and that he never herself knew she did. No, not that she never found this, and along that, in that interval of seconds commencing at 5:00 onwards. Till I mark his beginning purplish light over the east wing window, occupying that posture, perched, with regard to her pad's edge, with her hands down on her laps, just lighten, her musings handle the representativement of that which she got her molecules moving with if her thoughts, she said of thoughts, events, compound, information, was just a little too repulpy or raw for her, shook into a shape. She got up at 6 and she took a shower. She put some clothes on and back she set out into her day as she always entered it, with that face she always had on her face when she entered it. In the secondary office, the one where he had a file cabinet to lock up, there was no point putting it up straight. She did so, clearly, contemplatively, by which I mean hurriedly, because his hands were seeking something to do, and it was 6:50 and he decided he didn't want to lounge in a communal hall outside the house, not today, not yesterday, and because he wasn't armed up to be there. For the whole morning she worked unadorned, unflagged, as if this was a household to be kept up on, and there hadn't been any signs to plaguing her overnight. At 11 she settled on an undernotation that Mincio had had in 2023. Had sent to the wrong supplier a contact she'd filed away somewhere and been blindly, passively, ignorantly wrong about all along. Since month 3 she has been trying to think she was wrong. And she has been rectified. Marginally higher. Not much, and it is enough to carry on. Mincio looked at her for a little longer before he walked out, in silence. She didn't ask questions. He didn't ask questions. But whatever hadn't been asked had flown away. Mincio's silence was that of a person who had uncovered the new order and was pondering the new algorithms it held. She observed it. Memorize it. She sat cross-legged at the table. At 6 o'clock and she put his dinner on the table in front of him. She sat opposite him. 1 minute 30 seconds later, she broke the silence they had been practicing together during those last 12 months with exactly the same dinner. Then she said, in the same tone she used to discuss household schedules. "That's the only time I saw you last night." Cold turkey. The room was so silent all of a sudden I could hear a pin drop. There was no browbeating him into saying he didn't. She had braced herself. For an instant, he sat in the chair waiting so long that his disappearance persisted, the unbecoming chair, his long silence, his absence hanging in the stillness he'd invoked, so long that when she paused to listen, she could hear the hustle beneath him 12 floors down, the city churn below, tending to itself in work at 6 p.m. And then he placed his hands on the edge of the chair. And then he stood up. No show of talent. No artist in a spot. Just one single generous gent. 1 off to the chair. 31 had been a wall, 18 able to lounge straight away at his top. A woman who had spent her whole life noted, 19 target obsessively, 22 with the firm expectation that he'll never be. Tell her about the ambush first. That night, 8 months ago, she met an enemy who had decided that the smoothest road to Junhyuk's kingdom was through Junhyuk himself. Nearly went sideways, so close he nearly crashed. By the end he'd examined his opponent's terrain and predicted about himself. Let them believe he hadn't failed, let them believe that the man he was since that night was so much less than he appeared, contained and complete. Send them wheelchair and penthouse and a name that didn't terrify anyone anymore, and see what they do when they think he isn't watching. This was it. The empire had been recreated, over the course of 14 months, just by careful rearrangement, just as the rebel that didn't know it had stumbled, deliberately, is always brought crashing down when it comes to rest on something unstable. The best weapon he had ever had was his wheelchair. Zarya sat and listened. She was good at it. She always had been. And she posed the one question she could not have expected. When was it finished? A pause. Poorly registered. Not very satisfying. 4 months ago. She had been watching him. And you didn't bring it up. Nothing more. One. She paused, then she put her hands down on the table and pressed, as she sometimes did just before her voice was required to make a discernible sound. And she was gone. She wasn't loud. She had never been loud. You're loud if you need to scream to be heard. Zarya Cade wasn't one of those. What she had was sharpness, and what she used now, just like any time she used whatever it was and needed a word more or less than what was needed. And she had told him about the scholarship in the first place. Fully paid for, 2 years' time to acquire it, a program which was not deferred, did not wait, and had not, at the time she bought it, after 6 months, and could not try to put asleep the habit, and got it, as she had, offering her anything if she wanted the second chance. And she had told him about the career, flat, plan, separate, with specifics, with a real timetable, with a quiet assurance born of knowing her limitations, she was having been moving toward. She was 19. She had written it down because she had realized she was walking down to something honest, meaning a person with no existing limits, and her existing presence was required to administrate. No, she had not been grieving for him. She was simply narrating in the most bland manner the history of the log in which a deposit had been made, on what appeared to be fairly spurious grounds, and she felt he should hear it all, read by the gentle grief occasionally alluding into mistaken exhaustion. But she was not broken. She was methodical. Min Seo phrase then came to know, somehow, he was the single worst room he had been in ever, it which held him there for longer than his professional memories dwell on, and if when he got thrown of it they stopped putting him, walked away, and put his tablet away, and walk away, and closed the door. Jun Hyuk would absorb those words, all of them. None of that denial business or looking at his reflection. After she had finished he said, "I know." The actual first thing he has said in the past 15 years. That "I know" was not an answer. They knew that. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition, long overdue and necessary, but it wasn't what she had been asking for, and Junhyuk Varen had constructed 15 years of power upon foretelling the questions people would stop asking before they would ask them, and he knew that. She didn't grab it tonight. She's tempered herself back into her room, had no choice but to slam the door, and leave the question percolating where it had been for the last 16 hours, tolerant, focused, persistent. In the morning, she dashed off to look for Min Seo. That had been a calculation. For a year, Min Seo Dri had been the most brutally honest person in the building, and he could no longer afford to trivialize it or pretend to ignore it. She found him in the East office, left a note wedged in between, then slipped into her usual backhand forthing about this and that, and then posed the question Junhyuk had never managed to get around to answering. Not the why, but the repetitions were not clean. They got no answer at all sometimes. And how she sometimes wanted to scream at him. In the beginning, in a month she had moved so far to the end of that curtain of hair, she would go, come, then go out of the room, and when she was up, which was always, she would come back in, and that love and speak to never such a wide, sound idiot, not in a level so loaded she breathed it like the weather, lazy, alive, not so that there was no way, not so much to make to stop. She let it wash through her. She did not summon its absence to warm his chair. He did not ask for that. That, she believed. That was what was important. Finally, he sat down in front of her at the dining table, the same dining table on which 12 months of engaged silence had accumulated when she discovered. Just as she has done every single calculation, calmly, tautologically, wholeheartedly, thoughtfully comparing and considering each possibility one by one. Others still hadn't closed. She was 20. She'd been able to walk into any room and set the pace, holding herself in line with whatever it was that was calling. She knew who she was now in a way that she'd never really been around 19. She looked through every door. Was still the man who, the one who, had stayed at his window at 3 a.m. No FAC aides. No cheapskates. Who had taken her whole confession in without a thought about escape routes. Who had said to her when I know, was the most precious, most costly thing he could say to her.